Well, Browns fans, we've officially seen both rookie quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders last week, Dillon Gabriel this week, and we have plenty to react to in our post-game episode here at the Cleveland Browns on SI. How are you guys? I hope you enjoyed the game. A lot to certainly get into between Anthony Moeglin and myself. As always, I do want to remind you to head on over to si.com/NFL/Browns for the latest news and info regarding your Cleveland Browns. I have my column up calling Dillon Gabriel's performance complicated, which I will elaborate on here in this conversation. Some other big things to hit on, though, as well. And we appreciate you guys jumping on in with us. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already and you don't already follow the channel. But Megs, certainly a lot to talk about. As we get into the final week of the preseason here coming up, it's going to be your final dress rehearsal. That's how Kevin Stefanski always treats it. And Dillon Gabriel got his chance, as we kind of anticipated, to play, to start. And I think there was some good. I think there was some bad, which is part of the reason why I call it complicated. I'll kick it to you, though, first. What was your initial reaction to Dillon Gabriel's first start in a Browns uniform, at least in the preseason? Because, by the way, I hate when we call preseason debuts NFL debuts. It's the preseason, guys. Technically, I guess he played in the NFL, yeah, but it's like we're going to call his regular season debut his NFL debut. So we can't double up on that. It's a preseason debut in my eyes, and that's all it is. But anyway.
You heard it here first. Germ says not. He's still.
Hey, hold up. We can't hear you. Did you mute yourself? We're going to have to guess how Anthony Moeglin feels about his preseason debut. Well, listen, while he's figuring out his microphone, there's always technical issues always seem to persist here. So I think Megs, well, I'll say it again when he comes back, but for me, the reason it's complicated is because, and I know, listen, there's Shedeur Sanders fans who are like, it was awful. This guy shouldn't be ahead of Shedeur Sanders. And preaching to the choir, I think Shedeur Sanders is the better of the two quarterbacks. I think Shedeur Sanders should be ahead of Dillon Gabriel on the depth chart. So I want to get that out of the way now. But the reason I say it's complicated is because it wasn't all bad. There was actually a lot of good to take away from this performance. Like, it would have been easy if he had just stunk up the room to then go and say, hey, Shedeur's the guy. Like, he's the better quarterback. And I still believe he is the better quarterback. But it was, yes, he made a rookie mistake on the interception. He messed up the handoff to Pierre Strong, and that was on him. In the end, they gave him the fumble. And those two blunders are going to overshadow everything else. The interception play, yes, he should have absolutely thrown it away. I'm not going to exonerate him from that. That's a rookie thing. Like, I'm going to try to squeeze it in, and he shouldn't have done it. But at the same time, it was an awful route concept by the guy. Not concept the play was fine, but it was how those routes were run that screwed everything up, because it was basically like a levels concept, and all three guys kind of ended up in the exact same part of the field, because the guy that was supposed to go deep didn't go deep enough, and then the guy that was supposed to go shallow went too deep because he was trying to get away from a linebacker, and so he ran into the second level, and they were all just kind of standing there in the same place. And so then he tried to force the ball. But those two blunders are going to overshadow everything else, Megs. But around those two blunders, you saw a quarterback who led 3 scoring drives, had a really good opening drive that ended in a touchdown by Amani Marshall, which we'll talk about him in a little bit here as well. He was really good on third down. He looked poised. He converted the first, I think he was 4 for 4 to start the game on third down. And he converted 6 in total. And he was making some big-time throws. Him and Jamari Thrash had a really nice connection today. Like, you saw a lot of the reasons the Browns like Dillon Gabriel. But you also saw the 2 blunders, and those are going to be hard to forget. So for me, complicated feels like the right word. Yeah,
complicated is really good. You got me? We got me?
Yeah, we got you now.
All right. Yes. All right, we got me now. All right, sorry about that. Complicated is kind of the complicated is like the perfect word for it, because in my opinion, like, I thought the first drive, I was like, oh yeah, this is what makes sense. When everyone says, the Browns are really high on him, he is surgically accurate. I don't care what you think of him, who you think needs to start, whatever. There is no no discussion to be had about how accurate he is. He can put the ball on a pin, and that is really impressive. And it was evident today. There's a couple out routes. Jamari Thrash, we'll get to him here in a little bit, but I was really excited for Jamari Thrash and for his long-term view on this Browns team, because I think he showed a lot today. But Dillon Gabriel, I thought was really good to start. The interception, frankly, former quarterback, really pissed me off, because the spacing of his receivers was horrible, and then the tight end who he was throwing to just alligator armed it because he didn't think the ball was for him, pulled his arm back, and then Quinyon Mitchell was right there. It was 6 to the house immediately, and that was one where it's like the fault I give him on that one is that ball should have been thrown into the 200th level. Like, hey, it's weird, it's congested. Throw that thing into the stands and live to fight another down. Don't force it, because let's say the catch is made, that gain is 5 yards. It's not like he was trying to fit it in to throw a touchdown. That would have been a very minimal gain. Throw that thing into the stands and live to fight another down. The one that I'm excited to see later, and we'll definitely look at it later when I jump into that film room, is the fumble on the exchange. My first initial instinct, it looked like Dillon's fault. Like, it looked like Dillon came out and was thinking that it was going to be a tighter handoff, whereas Pierre Strong and the offensive line looked like the impact point was a little bit wider. And then you saw Dillon have to reach a little bit further and try to force it in there. My first initial instinct was that's Dillon's fault. Obviously have to go back and watch it there. But the two blunders obviously stand out, but as a whole, 13 of 18, 143 yards, the interception. But the big one for me was third down. And I promised myself, I said it to you before we started recording, it's hard not to be hyperbolic about the preseason, but to start the game 6 for 6 on third down, that is the money down. It's the defense calls it the money down. The offense calls it the money down. If you can convert on third down, extend drives. That first scoring drive was 13 plays, 63 yards, and a touchdown. That is exactly how you draw it up, and it's because you can convert on third down. And there's a lot of them, without going too far into it. They were in third and manageable every single time. There was 1 3rd and 10 that he converted that I thought was awesome. I thought it was more good than bad, but the two bad were really, really bad. So for me, complicated is a good word. I tweeted it out just a little bit ago. My grade for him was a C+ on the day. The good was so good. The bad was so bad. And the fumble is the one that stands out to me most.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, people who I text with during the game, X's and O's people, they said they believed, like you said, Meg.
You lose my number, dude, during the game? You lost my number?
No, I think I'll just say, it's mostly Lance Risand, who's he's one of my guys. I love you too. I appreciate your insight. Yeah. But I also knew I was going to see you. I was like, we'll talk about this after the show.
Okay, all right.
Lance, I text him a lot.
Out of this one, Jeremy.
Yeah, I text him a lot during the game, and so he was like, the fumble sort of concerned him as well, and he did put it on Dillon Gabriel, and so those were the two blunders, right? And at the end of the day, you're not going to totally. It is his fault, but there's a little bit of grace to be given for a rookie. Trying to force the issue on a play that turns into an interception, because rookies do that. They try some things. They're sort of test running different things that they can or can't do. So you understand, especially in a preseason game, other rookies might make that mistake. The difference, though, is that Shedeur Sanders did not make that mistake in his debut. He didn't have any turnovers. He didn't throw any interceptions. He didn't, throw any pick sixes, and he threw 2 touchdowns. And so, listen, this is also why the situation as a whole is complicated, because we know how the Browns feel about Dillon Gabriel. My guess is they saw enough today with how he ran the offense, which is a very important piece of the puzzle, by the way, that that they feel convinced, they still feel good about taking him in the 3rd round. And they're like, hey, this is our guy. Look how he ran things today. We feel good about it. Yeah, he made mistakes. Of course, guys make mistakes that are rookies. That's my opinion. That's my guess on how they're going to go about it. And so I don't think the depth chart's going to change. But the reason it's complicated is because that we saw the two performances. Both gave you something to ponder. Both showed you some good. Both showed you a little bit of bad, probably less so from Shedeur Sanders. And based on how the Browns feel about Dillon Gabriel, they're going to probably still have him ahead. But we know the masses seem to think it should be Shedeur Sanders. So this leads us into an interesting conversation just about what this depth chart's going to look like. Because I also think there's a place where this team keeps 4 quarterbacks as well. Yeah. And that means Kenny Pickett might be the number 2 guy. I don't know. Kenny Pickett is kind of the wild card here for me, because in theory, like they wanted him to be more involved in this competition, but the hamstring obviously derailed that to a degree, and they didn't get a chance to evaluate him fully. But if they weren't evaluating him fully, how can other teams evaluate him fully? Like, what is his value if they try to trade him to some other team at this juncture? I don't know. So part of me feels like a large part of me has leaned lately towards they're going to keep all four, and it's probably going to shake out the same way. But if it was up to me, I think you've seen more from Shedeur Sanders throughout this preseason and training camp than you have from Dillon Gabriel. Obviously, you've seen more than you have from Kenny Pickett because Kenny Pickett hasn't really done much since he got hurt 4 days into camp. So because of that, I have Shedeur Sanders as my number 2 quarterback, but that doesn't mean it's going to shake out that way. And I've had Shedeur Sanders as my number 2 quarterback for a while now. And part of this too, Megs, in terms of like the Dillon versus Shedeur thing, is Dillon. With Dillon, it's been moments. I was thinking about this earlier. There's been moments where you see him make a big throw at practice, or maybe it's a couple throws in a row that he makes at practice, and it started to feel like, oh, he's learning some things, he's picking up some things. But I've never left practice and felt like, man, Dillon just like crushed it today. Yeah. Like he had a great day. And I have done that with Shedeur. I have done that with Joe Flacco as recently as Thursday when I was leaving Philadelphia, and I was like, man, he was something today. Joe Flacco was. So from that standpoint, I think you've had moments with Dillon Gabriel. I think you've had like legitimate, like consistent performances at practice and in the preseason game that we saw from Shedeur Sanders. And I think that's the big difference for me too, as to like why it's going to be complicated because the Browns view it a certain way. But I think everybody else has eyes and they view it completely differently or largely differently. So, yeah, it sets the stage for what's going to be a very interesting discussion about this quarterback room. And the only thing I can say wholeheartedly is Joe Flacco is your number 1 guy, and that's probably going to come down at some point in the next 24 hours.
And that's the good part is that, you know, this argument we're having is who's going to come in second, you know, if Joe does get injured. And, you know, like that's the good part about this. But I do agree with you, man. Like, these two, my 2 main takeaways were this, like all the people saying that Dillon Gabriel, you know, can't play football or doesn't deserve to be on an NFL team. Like that is clearly wrong, like super wrong. Like that is just not true.
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
You know, there was people in camp saying that he doesn't deserve to be on a football field. Like that is not true at all. And one of the things I was like looking for today, was just a keen eye for was like, hey, does his size come up? Like does the height, because that is the biggest conversation around him. Does that impact him? And it's going to throughout the year at some point, but today it did not, right? Like he does have to be creative in arm slots and finding different throwing lanes. Yes, but he's done that his whole life. He was under center. He was off of play action. He was even just quick dropbacks, getting the ball out, being super accurate. So like that was one thing that I was kind of looking for. And then like the whole big picture quarterback conversation, I do think that the Browns come away from today saying, hey, we've got 2 young guys who at the very least could be a really good backup. Like at the very bare minimum, you have 2 guys that you feel comfortable with being the backup. And now let's just say, let's play scenarios, right? Let's say Shedeur goes crazy and is like, hey, we're going to have you be the starter. You feel comfortable when Dillon has to come in, or vice versa, right? Hey, Dillon's shown and proved that he's going to be the starter. You feel comfortable when Shedeur has to come in. You know, so I do think that they can feel comfortable with that, and being where they drafted both guys, you can keep them for a little bit. That would be if all things were equal and it wasn't Shedeur Sanders, one of the biggest personalities you've ever met or ever seen. So, like, obviously that plays into it. But, you know, I do think the Browns come away with this fairly confidently, and knowing that they do have 2 young guys who are going to compete and going to give you a chance whenever they're on the field. Now, what this does set up, Germ, is next week's going to be awesome, right? Let's just hope. And Shedeur was out on the field throwing a little bit today. Let's hope that Oblique can get back to competition level, and that these 2 can go at it all week in practice, and then in front of Cleveland Brown Stadium or Huntington Bank Field, like have Joe Flacco take 2 series and then bang, it is on for your home fans to see a quarterback competition.
Well, and that's going to be interesting. Pickett's situation is going to be, interesting too, because if he comes back into the mix here, is it Flacco to Pickett, then to the rookies? How does that sort of work out? And the other thing you got to think about with Gabriel too, or really the 2 rookies, is like they played different teams. Like so many people are already throwing out there like, oh, well, Gabriel was going against the Eagles and the Eagles 2s are better than the Panthers first team that Shedeur win again. It's just like, guys, like we're splitting hairs at that point. And at the end of the day, this is the preseason. But like, you know, I don't need this discourse over like this guy went against this team. It's the preseason. We can get some information from it. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. I think it's okay to walk away from this feeling that Shedeur Sanders clearly had the better debut of the two. I also think it's okay to say that, Dillon wasn't as bad as the pick six and the fumble make it out to be. Again, for me, I know what the depth chart would be. I think Shedeur Sanders is more purely talented than Dillon Gabriel. But the Browns are going to make this decision based off of all the information that they've gathered and based off what how they feel about Dillon Gabriel. I think he's going to be higher in the depth chart when it's all said and done. But yes, seeing them go against the same team next week, that could be interesting. Assuming they both play. And so this thing's going to carry on. Another thing I've seen is Dillon did less with more because he had Cedric Tilman and Jamari Thrash out there. Jamari Thrash has been brilliant this camp. He did play last week with Shedeur Sanders as well. Cedric Tilman, though, he's had a bad camp. And I sort of pushed back on the idea that him playing in this game was a massive advantage for Dillon Gabriel in this game. Cedric Tillman's been fine. I don't know that it's no wonder Dillon Gabriel had so much more success. He had Cedric Tilman out there. It was we still have a lot to learn about Cedric Tilman at this point.
A ton. Yeah. And Tilman, 1 catch, 18 yards on just 1 target. Right. And it was for him, this is a big season. You got to kind of prove it, dude. Especially with Isaiah Bond coming in and Jamari Thrash taking that step up, that you feel like you were the number 2 guy, go out and do it, go out and prove it. And I kind of feel I agree with that. Jerm, before we get off of the quarterback conversation, I do want to we need to say it on our show because it's about to catch wildfire. Schefter just tweeted out the video of Dillon saying the entertainers and competitors thing.
Yeah, he clarified that after the game.
And this is going to get bad.
He clarified after the game because he was asked from Aditi Kinkabwala, basically how do you block out the noise and not let that get to you? And he said, there's entertainers and there's competitors. He wasn't referring to Shedeur Sanders. He was apparently, as he clarified, referring to the media. They're here to entertain and that's their job. And I don't really listen to it. And I'm here to just compete and try to play football. So, just to it's a good thing to bring up because I see it.
Schefter just tweeted it, man. It's gonna get ugly here.
It's gonna be a whole thing. He's gonna have to answer for it, whatever. Time he's gonna get asked about it later. He's gonna hate the media more for having to ask about it later. It's gonna be a whole thing. I also was gonna bring this up. Dillon was working with the first team and didn't drop the ball. Shedeur was working with the second and third team, dropping a lot of this ball. I'm confused by that comment because Dillon wasn't working with the first team today. He has been working with the first team at camp. And that's honestly, Anthony, another reason why this is complicated because Dillon has worked with the first team more than Shedeur Sanders has. And there's been a lot of mixed results versus Sanders. It's been no matter who he's been with, except for the ones because he hasn't had a chance to play with them, it's been pretty much steady performances throughout all of camp and in the preseason. So the debate goes on. The debate rolls on for this fan base into another week. But you know where I stand, and the fans should know where I stand. If it was up to me, Shedeur Sanders would be your second quarterback on this team.
We talked about it before. We're going to do depth charts. You did yours. I agree with yours. It's Flacco, Shedeur, Gabriel, and then try to trade Pickett.
And honestly, with us saying that, by the way, that might be the thing that this entire Shedeur, Gabriel debate and their performances in the preseason, the thing that it might pave the way for may just be Pickett's the odd man out, and that's that. And I don't know how you get rid of him because I don't think they're just going to cut him because they traded for him and they gave up draft capital for him. But if the answer is just try to trade him, the other problem with that though is what's his stock on in a trade. So that's why I kind of feel like they're going to keep all 4 for now. But maybe that's what this proved is Dillon showed he can run an efficient offense. Shedeur showed clearly he can run an efficient offense. We feel better about these guys than maybe, I'm talking as if I'm the Browns, than we even thought we did at the beginning of all this. So maybe that means we don't need Kenny Pickett anymore and he can be the odd man out. Maybe that's the thing that all this tells us, but it's still TBD at this point, and we'll get a better picture of the depth chart here coming up this week. We talked about Dillon, quote unquote, doing less with more in the wide receiver room. I got to be honest, Megs, I've changed my answer to the question, who's the number 2 wide receiver on this team, 6 times. I'm exaggerating, but at least 3 times throughout camp. For a while, I would have said Cedric Tilman. Then I felt like once the pads came on, it was more Deontay Johnson because he started really showing like, hey, I can separate. I can do some things. And I still think largely Deontay Johnson's had a solid camp and maybe a better camp than some of the other receivers, even though he's had some drop issues lately. And he didn't really do much out there in the preseason game today. But I honestly think like after today's game, I'm like, maybe Jamari Thrash is wide receiver too because he was really good today.
Yeah.
And he's had maybe the best camp of all the wide receivers other than Jerry Jeudy. But I'm talking about the wide receivers who are like down the depth chart fighting for spots.
Yeah, and the conversation is going to get even more. That room's going to get even more crowded next week when Isaiah Bond joins it, and you know you're looking at a room where and it's all connected too, man. Because like you're talking about wide receiver 2, right? And you can have a debate on who that second guy is going to be, right? Whether it is Deontay Johnson or Cedric Tilman or Jamari, all that stuff. But what's going to get interesting and goes back to the quarterback conversation we just had about them likely keeping 4 quarterbacks. You're only going to have room for 5 receivers. Like that's all you're going to have. And Caden Davis is a guy that they are excited about in the return game. So they're going to keep him for special teams purposes. So now you got 4 spots for that receiver room. And Jerry Jeudy's a lock. You feel like Cedric's a lock, and you feel like Jamari Thrash is a lock. So now you got 1 spot left, and they bring in Deontay Johnson. Now they're bringing in Isaiah Bond. And somebody's going to get left out. Gage Larvadain, who proved to be the only successful reverse runner, as shown by @Spencito on Twitter. But like who and there's a couple guys and you know they're going to use the practice squad as kind of that minor league team for when they do make a trade or they do cut down the roster and they can bring another guy in. But that room's crowded and it's funny when I talk about it like this, like none of those guys like jump off the page at you, but you can't like lose the potential of, hey, maybe Jamari Thrash could be a long-term play for you and you don't give him a chance and you kind of lose out on him. So yeah, that receiver room is going to get weird here in this next week and figuring out how they're going to manage it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, gun to my head today, I'd say Jamari Thrash might be wide receiver 2 right now. But I still think Deontay Johnson, I know people were like throwing out like their wide receiver rooms on Twitter during the game. I think Deontay Johnson still makes his team because he's had one of the stronger camps. And frankly, who else are you keeping?
Right. Yeah.
To me, he kind of has to be part of like your 5, or if you keep 6, you're 6. Because unless it's Gage Larvadain, but I think, Gage Larvadain, he told us his name is actually.
Oh, sorry.
But Gage has been brilliant. He's a great story, but he screams like practice squad guy. The same way that Luke Floria screamed practice squad guy because he's just undersized. He's just a little undersized for them. But yeah, I think he's going to be part of this conversation. But I like that wide receiver room clearly lacks the big explosive playmakers outside of Jerry Jeudy. We've known that from the beginning. It'll be interesting to see. This is all assuming that Isaiah Bond gets settled. Sounds like he's the last report I saw from Mary Kay Cabot at Cleveland.com was that he's flying to Cleveland tonight and is hopeful to sign a deal, and we'll see what that looks like. So if that comes to fruition, then they have another wide receiver who maybe they're going to try to run end arounds with. We'll see. But yeah, like it'll be interesting to see how he sort of factors into all this. He's got a lot of catching up to do to make the actual roster here in the next week or so. But if they signed him, you'd think like they sort of won him on the roster. So yeah, like they're throwing some darts here, but that wide receiver room is still a big problem and a big question right now. And the only things I can say confidently are like Jerry Jeudy is excellent. I have no qualms about him. And Jamari Thrash has had a really, really good camp, and I remain impressed by everything he's put together and put on tape this summer, because that was a guy that last year I was like, yeah, he's on the roster this year because he was a draft pick this year. But this year I'm like, no, he's on the roster because he's gotten better. He's improved. He's made sure he can catch the football this year. And that says a lot about his attitude, his who he is as a player. And so there's some excitement that with him specifically. But around that, like Deontay Johnson has had a good camp, but inconsistent at times. And Cedric Tilman is just like on a milk carton during these games, despite being supposedly the best receiver out there that they're putting out there. I know he didn't play last week.
Yeah, and
today.
Yeah, and it's disappointing because from his perspective, Cedric Tilman, like I talked about a little bit ago, but this is a big year for him. Like this is like put up or shut up. You gotta really step it up now. And from the start of it, you're not confident on what you're seeing so far, and that's the disappointing part. But when that does happen, other guys get an opportunity to take advantage, and Jamari Thrash is doing that. You go back a couple weeks on this very channel. I've been a very big Jamari Thrash guy. I know there was some hype going into camp about what he's done in the offseason to improve himself, and you're just hopeful that he can do it. Part of it might be that he wears the number 80 and he reminds me a little of Jarvis Landry, but that's neither here nor there. It is fun watching him run around. I do think he's off to a really solid start.
Let's talk about the run game for a little bit here, because today you saw them run for 131 yards today, which was massive. Now, context, of course, you're doing it against the 2s and the 3s, the Eagles, and even though it's the Eagles, those guys aren't, the best players on the team for obvious reasons. But I think that was a promising step in the right direction, which adds to, Megs, my sort of overall feeling that, like, this week in Philly, I think, was a productive one for this team. I think you saw some reason for optimism. You saw the offense end that second day, like being able to move the football. You saw the defense, especially the defensive line, really dominate. And then they get to the preseason game, and it's like, oh, now the run game's kind of working a little bit. I get it. Again, down the depth chart, guys are playing. But I think all of that sort of adds up into the same pot of, okay, you leave Philly feeling optimistic about some things and feeling like you are that this team is more prepared for the regular season, and that it doesn't have to be this disaster of a season where you only win like 3 games, because I think that would be constituting a disaster or less. And that maybe they can do what they're hoping to do here. I mean, I talked about it, but like last year, the joint practices were a joke. Like it was the Barnum and Bailey circus out there. And this year they showed some progress. They got better the second day, and then they go out in the preseason game and show some momentum in the run game. Now the starters have to do it, and that's the big key. We'll see if they can do it next week against the Rams. But, I think we should leave Philly feeling pretty good about a number of things on the offensive side of the ball in particular. And that run game is going to be such an important aspect. Plus, if Quinshon Judkins comes back, how does he fit into it all? That run game is going to be so important to the success of this offense that it was good to see them at least be able to do some things today.
Yeah, and I would add, too, one of my big takeaways from this game, and specifically today, you got to see it in person on Tuesday and Wednesday, but this group has an identity. For the first time in 2 years, this team absolutely has an identity. You know that on Sundays, they're going to come out, they're going to try to run the ball, they're going to throw off play action, they're going to do straight dropbacks sometimes, but they're not going to just sit in shotgun and try to do RPOs and do all that stuff that just wasn't working. Kevin Stefanski's back in charge of it. You can see his fingerprints all over this thing. He sees it very similarly to Tommy Rees, who's the offensive coordinator. You got an offensive line coach that's in there that you love. You got quarterbacks coach and Bill Musgrave that you love. Like, it looks like a team that is a more well-oiled machine. And like, I'm not going to say they're going to score 40 points a game, but what I am going to say is that they're going to be cohesive. They're going to have an identity, and just that alone is going to save you from getting blown out or having some ugly performances that they had in years past. And that part's exciting to me. And you saw the breadcrumbs of that today. And you know what I've been seeing a little bit of kind of floating around on social is talking about the depth of the offensive line. And, some people are talking about it. I am in the camp of, like, I thought today showed that this group is deeper than we may think. You disagree with that, but I disagree with you there, because I do think it's not super deep. Like, I think you can still fix that tackle, but I do agree. I do think interior wise that this group could be solid. Could be solid if you need to call upon them. Not perfect by any stretch, but I don't think it's as bad as maybe some are thinking out there.
Yeah, I'm trying to look something up here real quick along the lines of the offensive line, because I know Cornelius Lucas left with an ankle injury. He didn't return. I'm not seeing an update from Kevin Stefanski after the game, so I don't know that he was asked about that. And I was listening to the press conference, sort of bits and pieces of it, but I couldn't hear every question, so maybe he was asked and I just missed it. But I'll try to circle back on that at some point. But like Cornelius Lucas, I thought he had some bad moments in this game, and then he was hurt and left. And if he's hurt, that's kind of your swing tackle. So I don't know what that means, but you don't necessarily now have that guy missing, so your depth already takes a hit there. I thought Zach Zinter continues to look iffy. He had the early on the sack on Dillon Gabriel. He just completely whiffed on the guy, didn't even touch him. He's had a bad camp overall, I think. Despite me thinking in the spring that he was maybe going to show some progress there. So I think that is still one of the big position groups that they are really pressed at. Like I think there's some concern there. Like they need this starting group to largely stay healthy. They need those veteran guys to not have any injuries this year, because I think without those guys, you're playing with fire a little bit once you dip into the lower the guys further down the depth chart. Like I think I have some trust in Tevin Jenkins. I have trust in Cornelius Lucas despite him having a bad day. But again, the injury plays a role here too, and we don't know what that looks like fully. But like I'm not sold on that group, and I think there's some serious questions there. I also think there's serious questions. We'll talk about the defensive side in a second. We obviously know about wide receiver. I was also going to say though, Meg, since we were talking about the run game and how important it is, I actually think Amani Marshall's making this team over Pierre Strong at this juncture.
Yeah, Pierre Strong.
He had that 54-yard run, but he's been having a very he's had a very quiet camp in preseason in general.
Yeah, but even that 54-yard run, like unfortunately in the NFL, that's got to be a touchdown. Like you have to pull away, and
he did look like he was really slow. Yes,
he looked like the trailer was attached, and like I hate, I never want to it's just you need to be able to score on that, right? Like, and obviously the fumble factors into it. I talked about how I blame Dillon Gabriel for that, but there are going to be people that it is on Pierre Strong, but like, dude, like you're having a chance right now, and this is year 3 here in Cleveland. Like, you're definitely the odd man out if they do keep 3 now, especially that Quinshon's back. But in my opinion, I was texting with some buddies, and we were just texting about the running backs just in general, and the thought came up that Amani Marshall does feel like he's got a little bit more juice to him than Pierre Strong does, especially
for the really good block. He had the really good block for Shedeur Sanders last week. Had some nice runs today, scored the touchdown. And we know that there's a symbiotic relationship between the running backs and the offensive line. I'm worried about the offensive line. Running back is kind of a TBD situation based on Quinshon's return at some point we were anticipating. But yeah, there's some things on offense that we know are still an issue. I want to go to the defensive side of the ball real quick, because the secondary, I think, is another place that people should be concerned about the depth of the team, especially with Martin Emerson Jr. sidelined for the season. Not a lot of confidence in the guys outside of at the cornerback spot, specifically outside of Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome. Cameron Mitchell is kind of that next guy up, and he's getting moved all around. He's played outside a little bit of camp. He's played inside. We know he's kind of the next man up at nickel from a cornerback standpoint. And he got picked on today. That slant touchdown was against him. He cannot give it up inside leverage there because of what the coverage was, and he did give it up, and they scored. And I think we saw in Philly just in general, he was kind of picked on a little bit. So I think there's some serious concerns there. I almost wonder, Megs, if they end up keeping like 5 corners and 5 safeties, because they really do like to do, like, if they're not using a nickel corner, they run 3 safeties and put one guy down in the box as the nickel guy. And so I almost wonder if that's going to be the strategy here instead of keeping 6 corners. But we'll see what that all looks like when the 53-man roster comes out, of course. I'm just kind of at a loss right now with that position too, because once you lost Martin Emerson Jr., there's a little bit of like a crack in the foundation here a little bit for that group.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And you didn't realize really until today how important that Martin Emerson injury is, because literally outside of Denzel, the next 4 spots you don't feel at this point great about him, right? Cam Mitchell had a tough showing today. Now you're talking about Miles Harden. Anthony Kendall was on that, but he got hurt. He was an undrafted free agent guy, so he's not even in the room anymore. Like, you don't know where your potential even is, at that room, because it's Denzel Ward and then a bunch of, unfortunately, like, just guys trying to prove themselves. And that's not, Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome, and then a bunch of guys underneath that who, you're really, really unsure about. And that does not give you confidence going into the season, because, in a passing league, and you got Joe Burrow staring down, you're staring down the pipe of Joe Burrow in 2 weeks now or 3 weeks now, like, that is welcome to the league. Hey, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are on the other side of the ball. You better be ready to go right away. And that's a very huge concern in my book, and I think in everybody's book for this defense.
Yeah, it'll remain a concern. We'll get to see a chance of what that starting group kind of looks like and whether or not they use a nickel corner or 3 safeties next week, how much they sort of do that in the final dress rehearsal and all those things. But that's an area that I am now sort of putting on alert as concerning, given the injury to Martin Emerson Jr. That the guys filling in have not really looked great, or they haven't not stood out in any way. Throw this comment up here before we get out of here. Look, I would look good throwing 10-yard passes. The point of the QB scoring and 0 turnovers. You can't throw picks. And then the media says, well, was it all his fault? Well, he didn't have to throw it. I just want to be clear, TW. I don't know when you picked up listening to the show, but we both said the same thing. We're all in agreement here. Bad throw, didn't have to throw it. Routes weren't great. He doesn't get exonerated, though, for actually throwing the football. The easy thing to do there was get rid of it. He's a rookie. He makes mistakes. Rookies make mistakes. But I think here's the key distinction. Nobody should be leaving this game trying to argue that Dillon Gabriel had a better performance than Shedeur Sanders. No, that is factually not right. It's not true. So nobody's saying that. We're not saying that. I don't think anybody else is saying that, unless there's some real diehard Dillon Gabriel fan out there who's living in La La Land and they're trying to make that case. But what we said was it's a complicated performance because he did show an efficiency in running in moving the offense, and he did put 3 scoring drives together. But yes, those blunders are his fault, and he doesn't just get exonerated for that. And Shedeur had the better performance. In my mind, he should and has, I've said this from the beginning, he should be quarterback 2 on the depth chart. But the Browns, I'm sure, are going to lean into the fact that they like the way he operated the offense, and that will be the reason Dillon Gabriel stays probably ahead of him on the depth chart. Fair or unfair, that's how they're going to do it. I push back on that because I think Shedeur's the better player.
Germ, let me just even add one more layer to this. Like, 2 things can be true at once. You can't leave this game saying that he played better than Shedeur Sanders because it's not true. Shedeur played better. You also can't leave this game saying he can't play quarterback in the NFL. Like, that is untrue as well. Like, he did some good. There's some really bad. And here we go. Just they're not listening to us, Germ. They're not listening to us. Excuses. No.
I don't even know what that means. We're not making excuses for anybody. We're not. We made no excuses. We literally said it was Dillon Gabriel's fault that he threw the pick and that the handoff got fumbled. We said there's no excuses. We're just saying we're adding that we have context around this that like around those 2 plays there were some positives. That's just a fact. There were some positives. What I like if you want us to sit here and say like Dillon Gabriel can't play in this league, I don't believe that. If you wanted me to say he's better than Shedeur Sanders, I don't believe that either. So I'm not going to like BS you. But here's the other thing: you want a quarterback that can't play in this league. I think on the other side, DTR is a quarterback that can't play in this league.
Whoa.
He looked bad again in the preseason, nonetheless. He looked bad with the Browns last year. Like, it's not like Dillon Gabriel looked like that, where he was just like throwing these ridiculous passes when there was like people just bearing down on him. Like, eat the ball once in a while, DTR. You're in year 3. Like, that's an example of a quarterback that probably won't be in the NFL very long. Dillon Gabriel, I think at least showed you, okay, there's something there. Let's see what it can be. That doesn't mean I think he's better than Shedeur Sanders, though. Okay? That's all we're trying to say.
Not at all. We're getting too worked up. We gotta. They're pulling us in.
Yeah, they are getting us worked up. Classic. It always happens that way. Plus, Megs has a concert to get to tonight, so we're gonna let him go. Appreciate you guys though stopping by. Be sure again to head on over to si.com/NFL/Browns. Check out any of our written content. My column is up about why this is a complicated performance for Dillon Gabriel, and it sets up a complicated decision for the Cleveland Browns moving forward. You can read that over there. You can also read some other stuff from throughout the game. And of course, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to this channel for more conversations like this between Megs and I, all the press conferences and things that happen throughout the week. We'll have Kevin Stefanski via Zoom tomorrow. So keep on following along so you get all the latest on the Cleveland Browns. What's up, Megs?
Film review coming in the morning. We got Dillon Gabriel film breakdown coming to you tomorrow morning. So as Spence said, subscribe, hit the alert button. You'll get alerted once we go live. Probably be an hour and a half, I would guess. We got a lot to look at from it. That's
going to do it. As always, we appreciate you stopping by. For Anthony Moeglin, I'm Spencer German, and keep on following along with all things Cleveland Browns with the Cleveland Browns on SI.